are about to experience, Jackson Snyder presents. Direct from the Veroesin Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
This is the fifth in the series of Nephilim.
You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.
Now let us extol illustrious men, if men they be. Hereditary giantism, the biblical giant Goliath and his brothers. Yes, you heard me. This is a government article from the National Library of Medicine. Evidently, they have enough information from the Bible to build a family tree for the unfriendly giant Goliath. Here's the abstract. The biblical giant Goliath has an identifiable family tree suggestive of autosomal dominant inheritance. We suggest that he had a hereditary pituitary disorder, possibly due to the AIP gene, causing early onset and familial acromegaly or giantism. We comment on the evidence within the scriptures for his other relatives, including a relative with 6 digits, and speculate on the possible causes of the 6 digits. Recognition of a hereditary pituitary disorder in the biblical Goliath and his family sheds additional information on his and other family members' battles with David and his relatives. This should be interesting. Giants have been around since time began. They're first described in the Bible in the book of Genesis, 6:1-4, of course. Originally, giants appear to have been regarded positively, often considered as heroes, particularly by the non-Hebrew population. After the Great Flood, giants remained present in the scriptural texts, but their good reputation had waned in the eyes of the Hebrews, and they often tended to be seen as the enemy, often fighting in armies. Giants lived together as a number of separate races before and after the flood. The exact relations between different families of giants are a little unclear. For example, the Nephilim, particularly in Numbers 13, 32, and 33, appear to be present before and after the flood. The Amites, the Ammonites, or Enochites, and the Rephaim existed after the flood and appear to be separate entities, although the chronicler often uses the phrase like, suggesting they had a similar phenotype. Phenotype means appearance, or how the genes are expressed. The Enochim seem to be derived from the Nephilim. The Rephaim, although similar to the Nephilim, appear to be distinct from them with respect to the family lineage. Deuteronomy 2:21 states the Rephaim were largely subdued by the Ammonites that dwelt in their stead. One of the most prominent Rephaim was
Og, king of Bashan, who slept in a bed set of iron. 9 cubits was the length, and 4 cubits the breadth of it.
Deuteronomy 3:11. A cubit was the distance from the elbow to the fingertips. He appears to be one of the last survivors of the Rephaim. A race of giants implies a hereditary element, and the origins of some names may indicate the genetic pathway involved. The Hebrew word Anak may mean necklace, or possibly goiter. This could suggest hyperthyroidism, possibly due to the underlying pituitary gland or other endocrine dysfunction. Goliath the Gittite is the most well-known giant in the Bible. He's described as, quote, a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. From Samuel and Chronicles, we have drawn Goliath's pedigree. A literal interpretation of the verses suggests that his brother and 3 sons were also of giant stature. The name of Goliath's 3rd son does not appear in the Bible, so we have named him Exadactylus, as it was said that he had on every hand 6 fingers and on every foot 6 toes. Goliath's family tree is suggestive of a hereditary autosomal dominant pituitary gene. such as AIP. And there's an array here naming the biblical relatives that are mentioned, and here they are. Lahmi, Lahmi, who we find in Chronicles 25. Ishbi Benob, Samuel 21:16. Sippei, or Sath, Chronicles 24. And the code name Exadactylus, Chronicles 26-7. This includes Goliath's brother and his 3 sons. Hopefully, you can see on your screen a little chart of this family, because they actually have an algorithm of the family here, and it's labeled Goliath's pedigree. Affected members are shaded in black. The plus symbol indicates exadactyly. That means, of course, an extra number of digits. Goliath was killed by David, who threw a stone at his forehead. This gives further evidence that he suffered from pituitary gland dysfunction. A pituitary tumor pressing on his optic chiasm and consequent visual disturbance was due to pressure on his optic nerve would have made it difficult for him to see the stone in his lateral vision. Pituitary giants look impressive in terms of stature, but may not have speed and agility to match their perceived strength. David, having agility, particularly having declined the heavy set of armor that was offered to him, and being skilled at slingshots, may have found a way around the fearsome-looking giant by firing a slingshot from the side of the battlefield. The fact that Goliath may have had a pituitary tumor was recognized by Vladimir Berginger in a paper in 2000. In his description of the condition, he notes a painting of David and Goliath by Puget in the 18th century, noting the appearance of acromegaly in the severed head of Goliath, and remarks that the painting was done more than 100 years before Marie originally described the condition in 1886. He also helpfully comments that Goliath was killed by David severing his head, not from the impact of the stone that felled him, possibly due to a brain contusion, but did not actually kill him directly. Giantism results when a growth hormone-secreting pituitary adenoma is present before epiphyseal fusion. Pituitary adenomas can be present in a number of genetic conditions, such as multiple endocrine neoplasia type 1, Carney complex, familial isolated pituitary adenoma, or FIPA, Carney complex. Maybe that's Art Carney. FIPA is an autosomal dominant condition with incomplete penetration caused by germline mutations of the aryl hydrocarbon receptor interacting protein gene 4. Patients with AIP mutations have an earlier mean age at diagnosis than AIP mutation-negative patients. The age of Goliath isn't clear, but early onset of pituitary tumors is typical of hereditary giantism, and limitation of lateral vision is common. Goliath himself had a shield bearer precede him, possibly to indicate to Goliath the direction of the approaching foe. Polydactyly, many fingers, has not been described in association with FIPA. The AIP gene lies on chromosome 11q13.3. The Bardet beetle gene, BBS1, is located close by on chromosome 11q13.2. Bardet beetle syndrome type 1 is characterized by rod cone dystrophy, truncal obesity, cognitive impairment, and postaxial polydactyly. The protein encoded by BBS1 is thought to play a role in limb development. It's unlikely that Goliath's family had FIPA caused by a microdeletion, which also involved BBS1, as the genetic distance between the BBS1 and the AIP genes is separated by a 1 MB gene-packed region. Such a gap makes an inherited contiguous gene syndrome unlikely, as there would have been too many other features. Very rarely, BBS1 patients have symmetric exadactyly. Most commonly, it is present in one or two extremities, upper and lower, not in all four. We're not given much other detail about Exodactylus, so a new BBS1 mutation due to some complex rearrangement is unlikely. A new mutation in an autosomal dominant polydactyly gene might explain his symmetrical phenotype. If he had pituitary disease and 6 digits, he may have looked an intimidating foe, but he may not have been a great warrior in action. Perhaps they're just using Goliath for intimidation. Interestingly, the book of Samuel refers to 5 stones that David carefully selected for his sling from the nearby stream, and further reading of the surrounding passages show that David's relatives were all involved in the deaths of other giants in Goliath's family. There can be other interpretations for this and various types of symbolism, but it appears likely that several giants may have been from Goliath's family, further suggesting autosomal dominant inheritance. The reverse also almost happened. Ishbi-benob, Goliath's son, is credited with almost killing David until the swift intervention of David's nephew Abishai, 2 Samuel 21:16. So clearly intellect or agility was not deficient in some of the giants, and myopathy, seen in some cases of pituitary disease in later life, not a direct issue in the younger giants. The giants from Gath were present after the flood. One possible answer to the often raised questions of why the Nephilim giants present before the flood were not eradicated by it could be that new mutations in the AIP gene or some other genes caused new families of giants to appear. There's no evidence in the Bible to suggest that the Nephilim, Rephaim, or Anakim were directly related, but they may have had some relations in intertwined lineage. If Goliath was the son of Rapha, he's likely to be descended from the Rephaim, but being brought up in Gath, an ancient stronghold of the Anakim, could suggest he may also have had some Anakim relatives, making his champion status even more significant in the ancient world. Families of giants have been described in the medical literature, but this may be one of the oldest and most famous examples to be documented. Perusal of the archaeological literature of that period gives evidence of giants being excavated, but numerous fakes exist. Technology now exists to extract DNA from giant skeletons. And if any new excavations in the Middle East unearth a skeleton suggestive of Goliath, or of Og, or similar biblical giants, more proof may be obtained by careful DNA analysis, and it may be possible in the future to delineate the exact relations between the different giant lineages in the Bible and dissect them further. Now that's the kind of evidence the sensationalists need. Find a bona fide giant, analyze the DNA, see what we have. Has that been done? Looks to me like most of the giants that have been studied to any extent are fakes. In conclusion, Goliath may have had an AIP mutation causing early onset autosomal dominant pituitary gigantism, and one of his sons may have had a syndrome involving both AIP and BBS1, which could some way account for the physical characteristics of his family and their good success rate on the battlefield until they met David and his family. That's some little article from the National Library of Medicine, ncbi.nlm.nih.gov, and it was written in only 2014, Goliath and his family.
Giant, why are you so tall?
Well, sir, why are you so small?
Let us now delve into bad ideas from the Bible. From the Los Angeles Times, Slaying a Biblically Bad Idea, by Joel S. Bodden and Candida Moss, October 31st, 2013. How did David defeat Goliath? According to the Bible, it was because Elohim was on his side. But according to Malcolm Gladwell, it was largely because Goliath had a disorder known as acromegaly, a tumor on the pituitary gland. This disorder, identified in the late 19th century, manifests as giantism, and it may affect vision. Gladwell lays out his case in his new book, David and Goliath. Acromegaly could account for Goliath's unusual size, he writes, and the vision problems it can cause could explain a range of details in the Bible. That is, Goliath's slow movements, his request that David come to him rather than the other way around, his need for an attendant to walk with him onto the battlefield, even the fact that Goliath taunts David by saying,
"You come against me with sticks?"
in the plural, when in fact David is carrying but a single stick. This analysis isn't original to Gladwell. Dictionaries of ancient Judaism, biblical commentaries, and medical handbooks alike use Goliath as an interesting and well-known example of this potent condition. But even setting aside the problematic assumption that the biblical story preserves a perfect historical record, a problem exemplified by the fact that the earliest version of the story we have actually has Goliath saying,
"Stick,"
singular, diagnosing Goliath and recasting the David and Goliath story this way is insupportable. No modern doctor would be content to rely on the scraps of information that pass for evidence here. The hormone tests and the magnetic resonance imaging usually used to diagnose the condition are, of course, impossible to perform. Moreover, Goliath presents with only 2 of many symptoms associated with the condition. He was tall and maybe he didn't see well. Even WebMD wouldn't be so bold as to diagnose with no more than that. So this scientific, so-called analysis fails on its own terms. And even if we were to discover Goliath's body, exhume it, and prove with all our most advanced technology that he did indeed have a tumor on his pituitary gland, it would change nothing about the meaning of the Bible story and which warrior had the advantage. No one at the time would have viewed Goliath as anything other than fearsome. Being unusually tall would have been seen as a great advantage, particularly for a soldier. As for blurred or distorted vision, this was disabling in the ancient world, as it is today. But it must have been a great deal more common in a society without opticians. Today, 75% of Americans use corrective lenses. How much less noteworthy must Goliath's vision impairment have been in his own time? And I thought of that many times because I'm vision impaired. I am very myopic. And before they were able to lessen the weight of lenses, that is when I was a child, the glasses I had to wear were extremely heavy. And I had thought about, what if I lived in an earlier age with this disadvantage, or without being able to see well, and having no tools or remedies at the time? What would I have done? There must have been many, many people with this problem. The point is this: no contemporary of Goliath would have seen him as disabled, if in fact they themselves could see him clearly. What we assess as disability, the ancients saw as superability. What we interpret as impairment, they interpreted as a mark of divine favor. Within the world of narrative, it's clear that none of the Israelites or Philistines understood the confrontation as one of abled against disabled. It's telling that all the biblical verses Gladwell cites, he avoids the one that provides the key to the non-medical readings of the story. And I quote it,
I come against you in the name of Yahweh Sabaoth.
This theological explanation for David's victory may not be accurate. It may have been a matter of fast against slow, nimble against encumbered, innovative against conservative, as Gladwell suggests, but disabling Goliath, and therefore rendering Elohim unnecessary and impotent, is an anachronistic imposition on the ancient text. It produces a creative reading of the story, but it fails to give us what Gladwell claims to be providing, that is, an objective, timeless key to understanding Goliath's defeat. Reading the text in Gladwell's way is a form of nowism. It assumes that we understand the data better than those who are actually providing it for us. It is unfortunately symptomatic of numerous medical readings of the Bible. Many characters have been paraded through the amateur physician's consulting room. King Saul wasn't afflicted by an evil spirit from God. He was bipolar. The prophet Ezekiel's terrifying visions were not messages from Elohim, but the result of paranoid schizophrenia. And Job's painful boils were no divine punishment, but merely hyperimmunoglobulin E syndrome commonly known as Job's disease. The attempt to diagnose historical and literary figures using modern medicine obscures the fact that the significance of their physical characteristics has to be evaluated in context. The overconfident giant to be slain here is surely the short-sighted arrogance of modern diagnostics. That just kicks the legs out from under the previous notice that was written by Joel Badin, Associate Professor of Old Testament at Yale University, who must have some belief in the power of Elohim, even though he is a professor at Yale, and Candida Moss, the professor of New Testament and early Christianity at the University of Notre Dame. What happens to the power of Elohim, especially when one is the underdog in a great battle with a fierce and powerful enemy, if there is no Elohim to provide the power of righteousness on behalf of that underdog? And we find in another opinion piece in the New York Times, 20 years old, was Goliath, after all, just a pushover? And this is by Reuters news agency. An Israeli neurologist today came up with a medical explanation of how David could slay Goliath in the biblical account. The neurologist, who we mentioned before, Vladimir Berginger, surmised that Goliath suffered from a hormonal disease that put him at a disadvantage against David and his slingshot. Goliath, who the Bible indicates was about 10 feet tall, suffered from a pituitary gland disease called acromegaly. The doctor concluded, "This is the only disease where sufferers can grow to such a height," he said. He said Goliath had an advanced form of the illness, causing a tumor to swell against an optic nerve and damage his vision. "I am sure, from time to time, Goliath did not see David, because in the Bible it was written a few times that Goliath was very slow, but David ran," he said. The giant did not see David and was unprepared for the final stone, the doctor speculated. It was a miracle that such a small and young shepherd could defeat Goliath in battle. So what he's saying there is, actually, he didn't defeat Goliath as a miracle. Goliath was so addled that anyone could have come along and kicked his ass. And this is why he ends this little article with this: "But now I have found an explanation for it." Well, brother, you can take all the credit, too. Some people might opine that Bishop Daniel Ben Regesh is one of the descendants of the Nephilim, but I'm sure he would deny it over and over again. I'll have to ask him, because in his autobiography that I recorded in 4, 5, 6 sessions, entitled The One Who Got Away, he was born into a notorious family of criminals and was adopted out of that family, the rest of which are serving time in various prisons, while he's a bishop working for the other side, because Bishop Daniel Ben Regesh, such a friend of mine, is a big man. Here's my question. Is polydactyly, that is, having more than 5 fingers on each hand, a birth defect, or is it an improvement in genetic inheritance? Are there pianists, say, with polydactyly that are more proficient than their 5-finger-per-hand competition? What could you do with an extra finger on each hand that was totally and independently functional? Would you be ashamed, or would you feel blessed? This short article comes from ScienceAlert.com. Having 6 fingers is not as useless as doctors thought, by Michelle Starr. It's really not uncommon for human babies to be born with extra fingers or toes. Around 1 in 500 babies has it. These extra digits are considered useless and usually are amputated not long after birth. But as new research has shown, they may not be quite so bad after all. A new study of 2 people who kept their additional fingers, so they have 6 on each hand, has shown that they can type on their phones, play complicated video games, and even tie a shoelace, all with just one hand. As bioengineer Etienne Burdett of Imperial College London noted, quote, "Extra fingers and toes are traditionally seen as a birth defect, so nobody has thought to study how useful they might really be. In some cases, the defect claim is true since the..."
You may contact us at Jackson Snyder Presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Shrumkov. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
In some cases, the defect claim is true since the extra digits can be vestigial, hanging uselessly, or poorly developed. But removing them isn't necessarily a simple procedure, because each extra digit has its own bone structure, tendons, and musculature, all incorporated into the entire structure of the hand. So doctors don't have to just remove the extraneous part, but they have to reconstruct the whole thing. However, the new case study explores a different scenario. In the case of a 52-year-old mother and her 17-year-old son, the extra digits were well formed and fully developed. Both of them were born with an extra finger between their thumb and index finger on both hands. This provided the research team with an excellent opportunity to answer some burning questions about polydactyly. First, is the movement of the additional finger actuated by other fingers' muscles, or does it have its own dedicated muscles and nerves? They wrote in their paper. Second, how independent is the extra finger from the other fingers? Does its movement accompany the movement of common fingers, like in the little and ring fingers, or does it move independently from other fingers, like the thumb? They also wanted to know if operating an additional or supernumerary finger on each hand made the brain work harder, to the detriment of cognitive function as a whole. So they devised a series of tasks to put the subject's dexterity to the test. This included custom video games that used a standard computer keyboard and object manipulation tasks such as tying shoelaces, flipping book pages, and folding napkins. How about playing the piano? These were compared with 13 five-fingered controls performing the same tasks. The researchers found that the polydactyl subjects were more dexterous than the five-fingered controls, able to move their supernumerary fingers independently of the others with a thumb-like range of motion. Scans revealed that these extra digits had 3 phalanges, like a finger does, while the thumb only has 2, along with their own muscles, tendons, and nerves. A high-resolution functional magnetic resonance imaging, that's an MRI, while the subjects were performing the tasks, revealed that the brain did work harder to manage the extra fingers, but as far as the researchers could tell, to no overall cognitive detriment. Burdett said, the polydactyl individuals' brains were well adapted to controlling extra workload and even had dedicated areas for the extra finger. It's amazing that the brain has the capacity to do this seemingly without borrowing resources from elsewhere. Due to the limitations of the study, there's still a lot we don't know about manual polydactyly in general, though not all polydactyl infants have the extra finger between the thumb and forefinger, for instance, so it's unknown whether the position of the finger plays a role in the increased dexterity observed. Nor is it known if it's isolated to fully developed supernumerary fingers. Perhaps vestigial digits also confer a not yet known dexterity benefit. Those superior abilities of our polydactyl subjects, the researchers wrote in their paper, suggest to thoroughly evaluate the functionality of a supernumerary finger in polydactyl infants before deciding on whether to remove them. Now think, what if Goliath was not a half-blind, half-wit, but a very tall, 24-digit, beautiful machine? Svelte, muscular. We get the idea that Goliath was some big fat slob. What if he was a superior human? What if Nephilim, Gibborim were superior to humans? What if he also had superior hearing and other senses and the ability to outthink normal Homo sapiens? Then wouldn't it take either extreme luck or the power of Yahweh for the little red-haired guy to knock him down? And yes, the little guy knocked him down with a stone, that is, knock him out, but the giant wasn't killed until David removed his head. Kind of changing my thinking about the whole idea of the clumsy, fat, heavy, deformed Nephilim, Neanderthal. Who's to say if they weren't physically and mentally more fit for life than their totally human counterparts? We know that when their body did die, something went on into life, even though for some it would be imprisonment in nether gloom. What if? What if? I have here a lengthy article, which I found greatly interesting when I found it. I've had it for a number of years. It's titled with a question: Neanderthal and Nephilim, are they the same? And the paper is described by its author, John Denton, as a speculative research paper examining current evidence available on Neanderthal man with comparison to references in early manuscripts of the Nephilim as an ancient race of half-caste humans. Yes, you heard me. This is a government document. 2. The argument is presented that the scientific facts verify that the Neanderthal were in fact one and the same as the ancient warrior race of Nephilim. It's proposed that an examination of the evidence and facts currently available on Neanderthal man will reveal that they could well have been this race of half-caste humans referred to in some of the earliest manuscripts found as the Nephilim. Neanderthal man has become an enigma to science, once being hailed as the proof of the evolution of apes to modern man. He was considered to be the brutish ancestor linked to man in the evolution chain, the intermediate stage between man and ape. How things have changed. Now, Neanderthal is recognized by science and scientists as a contemporary of modern man, living alongside humans with many human attributes, but amazingly with a larger brain than man's. Were they Nephilim? To address this question, first we need to examine the current facts and information available on Neanderthal man. Let's go clear back to the beginning. In 1856, workers in the Neander Valley near Dusseldorf, Germany, uncovered a skull and some bones. The skull was unlike anything seen before, with a flattened cranium, with a heavy ridge above and very large eye sockets. Nearby, workers also uncovered an assortment of thick and heavily fossilized bones. In succeeding years, many further specimens were found, not only in the German Neander Valley, but in France, Italy, Iraq, and Israel. It is amazing to me that nothing was known about this before 1856. Controversy surrounded the interpretation of these fossils. Initially, a German anatomist, Rudolf Virchow, examined the first discovery and concluded they were Homo sapien with rickets caused by a deficiency of vitamin D. He considered that the flattened head was caused by repeated powerful blows. Of course, his examination was done pre-Darwinism, 1859, and very much pre-genetic investigation. When more finds came to light with what also appeared to be rickets, it was considered far too much of a coincidence, and for lack of any other explanation, they became relegated to a subhuman category. The French paleontologist Marcelin Boule,
That's pronounced Boule,
concluded that Neanderthals walked stooped forward, which fitted in with the then new current thinking of Darwin's evolutionary theory of the origin of man. For the next 50 years, this created the popular image of an ape-man intermediary to man. Science thought it had the conclusive evidence it badly needed, showing the missing stage between ape and man. Over 100 years after first being found, Boule's skeleton was re-examined in 1957, and it was now determined that Neanderthals walked upright and that the stooped posture suggested by Boule's skeleton was caused by arthritis. More evidence from various caves and digs have shown that Neanderthals wielded tools and weapons, wore ornaments. Finding out about our most recent common ancestor relies solely on inferences from the mitochondrial DNA of people living today. What if we could actually compare our DNA with the DNA of a distant ancestor? This, in fact, has been done with mitochondrial DNA from the bones of Neanderthals. Comparing this with the DNA of living people from various continents, researchers have found that the Neanderthals' DNA is not more closely related to that of people from any one continent over the other. This was an unwelcome finding for anthropologists who believe that there was some interbreeding between Neanderthals. I can't see this very well.
And why don't you make it bigger?
This was an unwelcome finding for anthropologists who believe that there was some interbreeding between Neanderthals and early modern humans living in Europe, which might have helped to explain why modern Europeans possess some Neanderthal-like features. These particular anthropologists instead would have expected the Neanderthals' DNA to be more similar to that of modern Europeans than to that of other peoples. Moreover, the researchers determined that the common ancestor to Neanderthals and modern Homo sapiens lived as long as 500,000 years ago, well before the most recent common DNA ancestor of modern humans. This suggests, though it doesn't prove, that Neanderthals went extinct without contributing to the gene pool of any modern humans. Of course, some say that has changed now, that somewhere between 2 to 10% of Neanderthal DNA is found in Homo sapiens. I just took a test online to find out what percentage of my DNA was Neanderthal. I don't have brow ridges, great big eye sockets, great big nose, and the quiz came out that I had 2%, strangely enough, but at this time, I think it was 10 years ago that this came out. The research found that there was no common inheritance between the two. How Neanderthal are you? Well, why don't you take the quiz and see? Chances are you'll come out with 2% like I did. The quiz is at quizony.com. That is QUIZONY.com. And the name of the quiz is How Neanderthal Are You? Try it. Let me know what you come up with. Another note here, there are many variables that can affect the mutation rate of DNA, including even the possibility that mitochondrial DNA is not always inherited strictly through the maternal lines. In fact, recent studies show that paternal mitochondrial DNA can on rare occasions enter an egg during fertilization and alter the maternal mitochondrial DNA through recombination. Such recombination would drastically affect the mutation rate and throw off date estimates. Not surprisingly, there's currently a heated debate over the value of mDNA-Eve, especially between history-hunting geneticists and some fossil-finding paleoanthropologists. Wow, it's hard to pronounce all these words. According to these anthropologists, even if we could accurately gauge the age of the ancestor, that knowledge is meaningless, because all she really is the woman whose mtDNA did not die out due to random lineage extinctions. Furthermore, her status as the most recent common ancestor doesn't mean that she and her contemporaries were any different from their ancestors. Remember, she and all her contemporaries had their own mitochondrial Eve, the premortal woman. Perhaps the most valuable finding regarding the most recent common ancestor is that she probably lived in Africa, a finding that supports the most popular theories about the worldwide spread of hominids. This little article is by Rick Grolot, the managing editor at this time of Nova Online. Now, this is a very long article, and I can't read it all. If you want it, just get in touch with me at www.yahad.me and ask for it. The name of it is Neanderthal and Nephilim Are the Same, and I'll send it over to you. But by the very title, we understand what their conclusions are, that Neanderthal and Nephilim are the same. I can't add much to that because I'm no scientist. And besides, I think scientists, especially on this topic, have a propensity to confirm evolutionary dogma rather than get at the actual truth of the matter. In another version of the same report, from Bibliotheca Pleiades.net, the editors of the article make a claim here based on carbon-14 dating. And here is their conclusion. It is the writer's belief that this hybrid half-breed race, referred to as the Nephilim, were in fact one and the same as the Neanderthal race. Anybody can make that statement, but they conclude that the new evidence examined supports a correction of the calibration of the C14 dating clock to include the carbon-14 build-up readings, which would bring both Nephilim and Neanderthal into the same time frame, and that time frame, according to them, is 4,400 years ago. So they have the Neanderthal living in the same time frame as the early Bible speaks of, along with the few comparisons that are worth looking at. Under the question header, does the evidence support linking the Neanderthals to the Nephilim? Number one, Neanderthals had brains as large, if not larger, than humans. Nephilim were a hybrid of two intelligent races. A large brain size could be anticipated. Second, the Neanderthals were well-muscled with highly developed physiques, compared with Nephilim would have inherited these common hybrid vigor characteristics. The third, Neanderthals had distinctive characteristics like flattened cranium, heavy ridge above the large eye sockets. The Nephilim were only half-caste with humans, characteristics being acquired from both parents. If that's the case, you get an idea what the physical appearance of fallen angels is like. Fourth, Neanderthals appeared after humans had been around for a long time, compared with Nephilim started breeding some 1,400 years after humans started populating the Earth. Fifth, Neanderthals and humans coexisted, sharing living space for a period, compared with Nephilim inhabited the Earth alongside humans for 120 years. And obviously, they're looking at Genesis for that, which tells me that the rest of their supporting comparisons really may or may not have basis in fact, as it appears that they are trying to use non sequitur characteristics of Neanderthal and applying them to the Nephilim. I don't see it.
What I see there is they are comparing phenotypes, that is appearances, and trying to make genetic conclusions from them. But genotype and phenotype are two very different things. And just because something appears like this or like that doesn't mean that they have equal gene sequences, because you'll find many humans that are ugly as sin, but are sinners, but that doesn't mean that their genetic makeup is the same as that of Neanderthals or Nephilim. We are here comparing apples to oranges, and they are trying to convince us with this that apples are oranges just because you eat both of them. What do you think about that?
I think it's groovy. However, I will give you their conclusion. The contradicting and mysterious circumstances surrounding the Neanderthals can be explained by the manuscript accounts referring to an ancient hybrid race, the Nephilim. These manuscripts are among some of the oldest ever found in the world, now collected together as part of the scriptures. The Neanderthal remains are very likely the remains of Nephilim. What that implies is that the angelic or demonic part of the Nephilim are either still roaming the earth or are locked up in some abyss someplace. I wonder why these demons, when they speak through their mediums, just don't say they were Neanderthals. It seems like by now, with so many demons speaking out everywhere, some would own up to the possibility. Some scientists, under the weight of built-up evidence, are beginning to do this. Others are entrenching themselves even deeper in their old theories. And what I'm talking about is that this writer doesn't claim the paper to be free of errors, but a stimulus to others with greater skills to examine further the information on the early activities of the human race that have been under our noses for thousands of years, generally ignored and forgotten. There's really no way I can think of to actually prove or disprove the theory. What kind of tests can you make on lying spirits? Truth should lead science and not the other way around. All disciplines of science, particularly the ones built on the 100-year-old theory of evolution, should re-examine the current evidence for what it tells, and not what they would have it say by discarding the evidence that doesn't fit with their preconceived theories. Maybe then many more of the present mysteries of science will not be so mysterious, after all, but find rational explanations. And again, this includes the previous paper I read, but it appears to be flat Earth, because they quote the Codex Leningrad B for Genesis 7:11, which they have saying, "On this day all the spring springs of the vast water canopy was broken up, and the windows of the heavens were opened. And in the next verse, and the downpour upon the earth went on for 40 days. Really, not much there to get a hold of. And it appears that there are very few, if any, that I could find, articles proving that the Neanderthals and the Nephilim are the same. However, there is, as I said before, some evidence that human beings have some very small segments of Neanderthal DNA within them, which would lead us to believe that the two species could procreate together. And there is the theory of one infant skeleton that's been found that seems to have characteristics of both. Just happened to fall into scienceblogs.com and read the introduction to their article, Neanderthals Were Nephilim. And let me just read to you. It's a little bit humorous. Hold on to your hats, don't be too shocked, but a creationist has lied about science. I'm constantly getting email from a fundagelical group insisting that I must obey and join their one true faith, and I got one from the Worldwide Church of God, aka Radio Church of God, aka Grace Community International, aka whatever the heck they're calling themselves this week. They're kind of a quirky, long-separated splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventists with their own idiosyncratic theology, but one thing they definitely are: stark, raving, mad, young earth creationists. I was sent this bizarre article, Cavemen Are People Too, that grossly misrepresents the science of the recent Neanderthal genome sequencing. And here's their summary from Grace Community International. What did the scientists find? Simply put, Neanderthals are human. There was virtually no difference between the two codes. The few differences they did find were so slight that researchers say that they are functionally irrelevant, and that if more Neanderthal genomes could be compared, there might be no differences at all. But that is not all the scientists found. The data suggest Neanderthals are as closely related to humans as Chinese are to Germans or French to Javanese. Furthermore, the genetic material analyzed indicated that Neanderthals and humans interbred and produced offspring that interbred and regularly. And the blogger says, no? Did they even read the paper? The work by Paabo's team found that Neanderthals were distinct and different from modern humans in a small but significant number of ways. They were our close cousins, but they were also a separate and unique population. Yes, the differences were small. 78 genes were identified that were fixed to a different form in modern populations, but they definitely weren't irrelevant. Everyone is rather excited about the genes associated with the development and function of the brain that differ between the two. The stuff about being related to Chinese, Germans, etc. is totally garbled. What the researchers found is that there was some transmission of Neanderthal genes in the human populations that were ancestral to Europeans and Asians, but not to Africans. Sorry, you African Americans, you don't get any Neanderthal Nephilim genes. I am so sorry. African lives matter, and they should enjoy the same genetic structure, especially the influence of Neanderthals, as us whiteys do.
Caveman lives matter. I guess there's not enough cavemen to take up that slogan in these days. But maybe before the Nephilim went extinct, they had a similar movement. Obviously, it failed.
Do you concur?
I concur.
I concur.
I concur.
I concur.
I concur.
Concur.
I concur.
Affirmative. Keep this under your hat until an announcement is made.
They didn't find evidence of regular interbreeding. They found that Neanderthals made a small contribution to European and Asian DNA, on the order of 1 to 4%. And most of this was a result of a few early interbreeding events in the small but rapidly expanding population of modern humans expanding out of Africa. They didn't understand the paper at all and got most of the conclusions completely wrong. You can guess what they concluded, though. Here's their conclusion. Do you get that? All those supposed pre-man caveman bones are actually just plain old human skeletons. It's a startling admission for evolutionists because it throws a monkey wrench into conventional evolutionary theory. Back to the blogger. And then they're off and running. All those pre-human fossils, either man or monkey, nothing in between. Transitional fossils, if there aren't any differences between man and ape man, then there can't be any. It's all just, quote, DNA passed down from generation to generation. Yeah? So? The heart of their argument is that one class of ancient hominids had so few genetic differences from us that their differences are negligible, and therefore evolutionary theory is all wrong. It's bizarre. Don't they realize that we expect that the genetic differences between the sibling species recently separated will be much smaller than those between species separated by long periods of time? The discoveries in the Neanderthal genome are what we expected and fit just fine into evolutionary theory. And so the author from the offshoot of the Universal Church of God, or Worldwide Church of God, decides that, quote, science proves the Bible correct, and that the Neanderthals were actually the pre-flood Nephilim, part of the mob of evil, warring bad guys who motivated God to kill everyone except Noah and his family. Same old. Same old. That ends the article. This might bring you to the question, maybe, what does Brother Snyder think about it? Brother Snyder does not believe in progressive evolution. Why? Because it's not in the Bible? No, because it's not sound. Elohim gave us brains to find out the secrets of the universe, and sometimes he gives them as gifts. Not every bit of intelligent matter has been taught by the Nephilim. Progressive evolution, there's just so little evidence for that. Scientists, though, have made what little there is into a whole doctrine. However, local evolution can't be dismissed because we see that happening all the time. There are many for instances, but one that comes to my mind is that before the Industrial Revolution in Europe, walls that were painted white attracted a certain species of moth, a white moth. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, these white walls got dirtier and grayer and blacker, and the white moths began to change, and their color changed in favor of the walls that they frequented, to the point where you can't even find a white moth. They've all generated into black moths to fit the black walls blackened by smoke and filth. That's what I mean by local evolution. But now we've got to go. In fact, I couldn't get all of this session in 50 minutes, so I've had to leave some off for those on Hebrew Nation Radio. However, let us all evolve in the spirit, in truth, that we might attain the apex of perfection even before we go on into that next world. Yahweh bless you, and pray that this series on Nephilim will be of some value to those who need to know that they too might evolve in the spirit and in truth. Good night.